Have you ever just stopped and wondered, why does India have so many people? It seems like a pretty simple question, right? But the answer, well, it's this incredible story that actually starts with a massive geological collision millions and millions of years ago. Let's dive in.
So yeah, why are there so many people in India? It's officially the world's most populous country now. And that one single fact, it shapes everything. Its economy, its culture, its future. But how on earth did it get this way?
Okay, just think about this for a second. Get this, India is home to 18% of all humans on Earth. 18%! But it only sits on about 2% of the world's land. That huge mismatch is exactly why you always hear the word overpopulated thrown around when people talk about India.
So, let's start to unravel this population puzzle, because it really is a story told in numbers. Some of them are brand new, and some are, well, they're ancient. The big headline number today is roughly 1.47 billion. Yep, India has officially overtaken China as the #1 most populous nation. But here's the kicker. The real reason for this enormous number has way less to do with what's happening now, and so much more to do with ancient geology. And that brings us to the myths. Because to get to the real answer, the deep answer, we have to look right past all the usual explanations. Trust me, it's probably not what you think.
Look, we've all heard these reasons, right? People will blame poverty or a lack of education, or they'll say that poor families have more kids for more earning hands. Some people even point fingers at specific states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, whose combined population, by the way, would be the third largest country in the world.
And look, while those things definitely play a role, they're only a small part of the story. The fundamental reason, it is much, much older. And on a map, it is a whole lot bigger. The real answer, the core of it all, lies in a geographic blessing. You could almost call it a secret that's been hiding in plain sight on India's map for thousands of years. So allow me to introduce you to the main character of our story, the Indo-Gangetic Plain. Now, this isn't just any old patch of land. This is the single largest continuous stretch of super fertile alluvial plain on the entire planet. Nothing else even comes close. The story of this plain is just epic. It started about 50 million years ago when the Indian tectonic plate literally crashed into the Eurasian plate. That colossal collision didn't just push up the Himalayas, it also created this huge trench just south of them. And then, for millions of years, rivers just poured off those new mountains, filling that trench with this nutrient-rich gunk called alluvium, and in the process created the perfect foundation for a civilization to explode.
And really, this gets to a basic, fundamental truth of all human history. Wherever you find tons of fresh water and incredibly fertile land, you will always find large, booming civilizations. It's the simple formula for human settlement, from ancient Egypt to Mesopotamia. It just works.
But to really get your head around just how special the Indo-Gangetic Plain is, we've got to put it in context. So let's compare it to a couple of other famous cradles of civilization. This is where the sheer scale just hits you. The North China Plain, another major birthplace of civilization, is about 400,000 square kilometers. Egypt's legendary Nile Valley, a tiny 33,000. But India's Indo-Gangetic Plain, it dwarfs them both at 700,000 square kilometers. It's not even a competition, it is simply in a different league.
But it's not just about being big. This region has what you might call a triple benefit. So first, you have that unbelievably fertile land. Then you have just an insane amount of water from 3 major river systems, all fed by Himalayan glaciers. And finally, you have this near-perfect climate, shielded from cold Asian winds and blessed with monsoon rains. All that means you can have 2, sometimes even 3, harvests in a single year.
And this triple benefit explains why India's population dominance is absolutely nothing new. The historical numbers are just staggering. Back in the year 1 AD, nearly 1 in every 3 people on the entire planet was Indian. 1,000 years later, it was still more than 1 in 4. So what this tells us is that for most of human history, India was proportionally even more populous than it is today.
Okay, so this brings up a huge question, right? If India was always ahead of the pack for centuries, what happened? Why did China suddenly pull ahead in population during the 20th century? It seems to go against everything we've just talked about.
And here is the major twist in our story. The reason isn't that China's population suddenly went on some crazy growth spurt. No. It's that India's growth was artificially and just tragically held down. The 20th century wasn't the norm.
It was a historical anomaly.
Between 1770 and 1947, during the period of British rule, India was ravaged by 25 major famines. And these weren't just natural disasters. Many were the direct result of exploitative colonial policies. An estimated 35 million people died. To put that number in perspective, that's 4 times the number of soldiers killed in all of World War I. This era of extreme hardship put a massive, unnatural brake on India's population growth.
So, where does that leave us today? Well, the common perception is that India is overpopulated, but the reality is way more complex and interesting. India is in fact geographically blessed with the perfect conditions to support a very large population. And that population, after decades of catching up post-independence, is now finally starting to stabilize on its own.
And here's the proof of that new reality. India's total fertility rate, that's the average number of kids a woman has fallen to just 1.9. That is below the replacement level of 2.1 needed to keep a population stable. As things like education and healthcare get better, families are naturally choosing to have fewer children. The so-called population bomb, well, it's actually diffusing itself.
But the story doesn't end there. Not at all. Because this unbelievable geographic gift, the very foundation of India's existence, is now facing a threat like never before.
The very engine of India's prosperity is under attack from climate change. The Himalayan glaciers, what some people call the third pole, they're melting at a terrifying rate. The monsoons, the absolute lifeblood of Indian agriculture, are becoming dangerously unpredictable. The rivers are getting polluted and stressed, and precious groundwater is just vanishing. The entire life support system is being pushed right to its breaking point.
So the very geography that allowed 1.4 billion people to not just survive, but to thrive for millennia, is now incredibly vulnerable. And this brings us to one final, urgent question. Will the greatest blessing in India's long history become its future curse?